Hi, and welcome everyone back to another episode of the Lead to Scale show. I'm your host, Oscar, and today we're joined by James Gundersdorff. And I wanted to invite Jim. I think that he has a great story. He's been in the industry for quite some time. He's very personable. I actually enjoyed the call that we had when I first met him, so I thought he would be a great person to interview for this episode, and also for him to just tell us a little bit about his story, and maybe inspire someone to follow or not follow. He'll tell you a little bit more about that, his path. So anyway, welcome Jim to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Oscar. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I would start out by saying that no one should do what I did. No one. Yeah, you should have more of a plan. I just got kind of pissed off. I was working for another accountant, CPA in Raleigh, back in, I want to say it was 1982, I guess. So I've been doing this for about 43 years now. Yeah, it just made no sense.
Before we dig into that, though, can you please tell us a little bit more about you and your company as it is?
Oh, okay.
Right.
Right now, Gundersdorff Company Accountants, we do about $400,000 a year in revenue. We do accounting, taxes, payroll. We do some management consulting, and we also do taxpayer representation, which is basically controversy work in another name, where people have some sort of a problem with the state of the feds. And that's the beauty of the EA license. It allows me to work in all 50 states, the 4 territories. I'm waiting for somebody to call me up and say, hey, you want to come to Guam? I've got a tax problem. And I could go diving at the same time when I get there. But that hasn't happened yet, but I keep hoping.
Hopefully it will, and maybe someone in Guam will see this and call you up and say that. So that would be a great way for you to tell me, hey, Oscar, this happened. So
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now, Jim, sorry for just interrupting you a little bit, but can you tell me a little bit more about how you started, and why you started the company you're working for yourself?
It was probably totally by accident. I originally went to school for biology, pre-med, chemistry, pre-med. My mother wanted a doctor. That didn't happen.
That never happens, right? Like, moms never want a doctor.
Yeah, well, I started realizing while I was in school talking to the business kids that this was going to cost me a fortune. Like, roughly at that time, probably $200,000 in loans, that sort of thing. And I'm sitting there going, that just doesn't make any damn sense. So over time, I went from Fairfield University doing bio and went to transferred into Duke because I was trying to get to UNC at Chapel Hill in the fall, and I couldn't get there before the fall because they don't do mid-year transfers. Well, Duke did, I figured out. So I said,
okay,
let me see if I can get into Duke. So I went ahead and filled out the paperwork, got into Duke. So I went there for a semester. And that was the spring semester of, I want to say it was 1979. And then from there, went in the fall of 79 to UNC. And I will tell anybody that's from North Jersey that both schools are very similar to North Jersey. There are plenty of North Jerseyites on both campuses. I think the folks on the UNC campus are a little more lighthearted and probably more playful than the people at Duke. The Duke people were a bit on the serious side, but maybe I just didn't get to know them very well, so that could have been my fault.
When they play each other, who do you root for?
As long as one of them wins, I don't care. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm never disappointed. Let's put it that way.
And I mean, I think did I read that right? Were you at UNC around the same time that Jordan was still a student?
Yeah, but I never really met him at school. Now I did have tennis class with James Worthy, who was also on the team.
Oh, wow.
Him and Jimmy somebody or other. And Jimmy was like, I think the guard, because he was much shorter than James was. But they used to use us as like target practice on the tennis courts. Okay, so they weren't really trying to play tennis with it. They were just trying to hit us with the damn ball. That's all they cared about, And the guy that was the instructor his name was Charlie Brown. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And unfortunately, that's really true. James Worthy, Jimmy, and I can't remember the last name, and Charlie Brown as the teacher. It was just like, it was insane. Yeah, it was insane.
Awesome.
But yeah.
And then from your student days then to starting your company, why did you decide? You were saying earlier, right, that you got mad. So how did you decide to start your company?
Well, see, after I figured out that being a doctor wasn't going to make any sense to me, I said, well, let me just go to chemistry. And I really liked inorganic chemistry. You're sort of guessing what is the probability of an electron being in a certain state and in a certain place.
Okay.
And that made sense to me because we were using basically probabilities to figure things out and then testing later on in the lab. And then as I went further along, I was like, well, this isn't going to make any money either. And I'm also going to have the same debt because I have to get a doctorate in this stuff. So I was like, okay, let me just go over to business and get into accounting. Because in both cases, whatever's on one side of the equation has to equal whatever's on the other side of the equation. I'm like, I can do this.
Yeah.
It made a lot more sense to me. And then from there, after the accounting class, I started taking tax classes. And then the tax stuff really made sense in my head because there was just this thin thread of logic running through the whole code that sort of ties it together. And there's all these parts and pieces that you say, if this, then that.
Yeah.
But they're like exceptions. And so that's what makes tax just such a wonderful thing because like the English language, there are exceptions everywhere. I before E, except after C, etc. I mean, you get the idea. Learning English is probably the hardest thing. Learning another language. My grandparents were Italian, so I grew up listening to Italian in the house. My grandparents spoke a mixture of English and Italian in the same sentence.
Okay.
And so I grew up with that. We read the Sunday paper on Sunday from Italy.
Oh, nice.
So I got quite a bit of exposure to different things growing up. And I like, frankly, hanging out with my grandparents way more than my parents, which I think
That usually is the case. Yeah.
For most people, because we got to do stuff. And my grandparents ate much better food than my parents ate. Any day of the week. Yeah. I think, anchovies for a sandwich. You put the anchovies between the French bread and you make a sandwich that maybe with some roasted peppers on top of it. I mean, and maybe some cheese, some provolone in there. I mean, just really.
You're making me hungry now, Jim.
I'm sorry. Yeah. That just came into my mind like, good God, yeah, I wish my grandparents were still here because I used to go, like when I was at Fairfield, I'd drive home for the weekend just to go get a care package for my grandparents.
That's
if
awesome.
My mom wanted to see me, I'd tell her, meet me at my grandparents.
That usually is the case. Yeah, grandparents definitely take care of us. They spoil us, definitely.
So I get into this whole school thing and I figure out that accounting makes a lot more sense. And so then I go out into the world afterwards, after UNC, and I start working for this guy in Raleigh. And what he does, he rarely works. It's like, that's just annoying to me at 20 some years. I'm like 21, right?
Yeah.
It was annoying. I'm like, okay, this isn't going to really work for me. I'm probably going to need to go out on my own because I had, while I was in college, been doing a side gig, back before there were quote side gigs, where I ran a carpet cleaning and floor waxing and window washing business on the side, because you only take 15 to 18 hours in school. So you got all this other time to go do stuff. So I figured that instead of go get a job, I'd just run my own business, which I did, back in college. So I was already used to doing my own thing, which is a bad place to start. Because when you do that for long enough, you basically become unemployed. And then unemployable is the next scenario. And that's kind of where I found myself, where I understood what was going on and I really didn't want to work for other people and I wanted to do my own thing. So I just really went out and started. Borrowed about $10,000. Back then there were Apple computers and you could get software for doing tax returns and for doing accounting on Apples. Now, mind you, these are Apple IIe's and we had floppy disks that, and we figured out, we could get the other side to do something if we cut the little notch out, and flip it over and then use that side too instead of having to go get another disk. So there were like two things, because the other thing I did was I read this book while I was in college by, I want to say it was Huxley, The Third Wave, and he talks about information management and how information is going to be the next revolution in terms of what's going on in the world. First, there was the agrarian, then there's the industrial, and now we're going to have the information revolution. I wasn't sure the dot-com bubble was that revolution, but you get fits and starts. But I think the AI thing today, that probably is the beginning of the information revolution. And you probably time this out, it's probably 50 to 100 years before it really takes off and we actually figure out how to do anything with this stuff. I mean, I generally use ChatGPT on a daily basis. We have a paid subscription, so all our stuff is not going somewhere else. I still don't put anybody's name in there. I don't put any client information, but it is great for taking raw information and throwing it in there and saying, give this to me in a spreadsheet. Then you pull it out of that, throw it into Excel and do what you want with it, but you've already done half the work. So it really does speed up the process of getting, junk into some sort of meaningful semblance of order and then pushing it onto something else. It's also great for doing research as a starting point. It's not the be all and end all because you can't necessarily count on it's going to be accurate. But if you start there and say, I need to know what code section would do this, it'll tell you. Then you go find that code section, you go find the thing that you're looking for in that, which is kind of the point of what I do. I always look for that there's always something that you can work with somewhere in the code when you're in a controversy case, or even on working on a problem. Because if somebody comes to you before they've done something, you've got options. After they've done something, it is very difficult to change the reality of what happened.
Prevention, it's easier. Yeah, preventing something is easier than trying to fix it after the fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I am really good about, determining in my head and through the research, if we do X, Y, or Z, we could get here. But like, give me the parameters of what are we trying to accomplish here? You tell me what things in those are the most important to you out of, let's say there's 5 things. So what's your top 2? Which 2 things that you can't live without? What are the things that you could, maybe let go of? And then we try to figure out what fits that. What can we go find that fits that? And then, half the time you need an attorney, probably not half the time, probably more times than not, you need the attorney to do the paperwork so that it matches whatever the transaction is going to be. So I've done a lot of that kind of work too, where I've got some attorneys that call me up when they've got either business situations or divorce situations and say, hey, we got this problem here. They are some of the most fun, entertaining things I have ever done in my life, because you're usually dealing with stuff that is just really, if they'd have thought about it to begin with, they would have done something else and probably paid the attorneys more money to figure out what the problems were, but they just wanted to do it on the cheap. Rarely a good thing.
Yeah.
I get involved in some of those things, and I've had some really interesting cases where, the one spouse says, well, the other spouse is doing X, Y, Z. And you're like, that sounds a little bit like it's kind of tax fraud. And, that's probably not a good thing to do. So
yeah,
we want to insulate you from that somehow, some way. So, we then figure those out. Then I've had other situations where I've represented the spouse that was trying to get out of it, and they did something that, where they had an affair or whatever. And the other spouse is obviously ticked off. And, they're sitting there arguing over what I consider stupid stuff. And I'm like, dude, you made the mistake. Okay. She's upset. I think we can see why she's upset. You need to do some therapy and you need to let that crap go. Because this is not going to get you extracted. You told us to extract you from this in the shortest amount of time possible and in the most efficient manner possible. You're not helping. And the client looks at you and goes, but I'm paying you. I'm like, yeah, you're paying me to tell you what you need to know. You may not like what I'm telling you, but that's my job. So sometimes I don't win friends and influence people, but I am very much going to be honest. If you hire me, I'm going to tell you this is what you need to do. You may not like it, but that's my job.
Like it's your money, right? I can tell you what you want to hear, or I can tell you what you need to hear. It's your money, right?
Yeah,
but I would rather tell you what you need to hear.
I had a guy me to look at a set of books to figure out whether he wanted to buy the business. The first hour I spent on it, I said, you don't want to buy this place.
He goes,
but I need to understand why. I said, no, you don't, really. I said, you don't want to do it. I said, I'm telling you, this is a bad deal. I said, they're already $1 million in the hole. And that's just based on what I've looked at. And it doesn't show up on the balance sheet because of the way they're doing their books. I said, it's bad bookkeeping, and basically they're eating into the next job to do the last job. I said, you can't go anywhere near this. I said, just from the cash flow perspective. I said, they don't know what they're doing, and you don't need to be a part of it. So we wound up basically, spending another 10, 15 hours going through stuff. And finally, he understood what I understood in that first hour. But it cost him, how many thousands of dollars to come to that same conclusion that I told him in the first hour that he paid me $400 or $500 for. And we'd have been done.
Yeah. I mean, that was a lesson that he had to learn, the hard way. So maybe next time he'll listen to you a little bit more.
I'm not sure.
I do want to go back a little bit to the beginning of, you said that you were mentioning that you opened up your business, you got a loan for $10,000, right?
Right.
And then you also mentioned the Mac 2s. Like, how much of those $10,000 were, destined towards the infrastructure, and how many of them were destined towards, I'm going to do this for sales, advertising, marketing?
The entire $10,000 went to equipment. Those were Apple IIe's, plus printers, plus software. That was the whole shebang. I got 2 of them, so the software would work on either one. I always believe in redundancies. Like even now, I've got, a failover router here in the office that we have two internets coming in on. In the closet, I've got backup routers, in the event that they go down. It's the same damn router. I bought 2 of them. So that I can basically take the same damn settings and put it on the other machine, roll. Same
roll
thing
is ready.
for
You're
my
prepared.
switching.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, that was in the Marine Corps. So, you adapt, you overcome. It's just part of what we do.
Semper Fi.
Yeah, you figure out how to get to the next place, despite the fact that you don't have whatever you need to get there.
Yeah.
You try to cover all your bases.
And so, okay, so you spend all the money in equipment.
I went out and knocked doors.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. So you actually
Yeah.
went and knocked on
I went
doors.
and knocked. I started at the local mall. I went from place to place to place and actually picked up a few people. Then, started just calling people out of the phone book. Back then we had a phone book, the
Yeah.
actual honest to God yellow pages that was probably like, yay thick. I started calling people. Say, look, I'm an accountant. You need an accountant?
And I mean, I don't think most people nowadays, they don't understand, they don't realize, like how much persistence, right? And patience you need to actually do something like that.
There were people I knocked on their door, 6 years later, they
Yeah.
finally called me back.
And how often would you call those people? Or just
Every
that
quarter.
one time?
Every quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, the people that I was in, like the guy at the bike shop, I thought the
Yeah.
bike shop was a good group of people, so I want to talk to them. In fact, I used to ride with them. So I
Yeah.
started riding with them, back in my 30s, and these kids are kicking my butt, but I figured out how to use my brain to ride a bit faster when we were getting to they used to race to the county sign and to the bridges. I figured out how to get them on that stuff. I would draft off their backside and then roll around them.
That's good.
And get there. But because you're older, you got to use your brain.
Yeah.
But that's part of as you go through life, you got to figure out. I mean, early on, you can bang on doors, you can knock on whatever, and you can talk to people. But at some point, you got to do that a bit more intelligently. One of the reasons I agreed to do this podcast, it reaches a wider group of people, but it's the same thing. It's knocking on doors.
Yeah.
It's the whole point. You want exposure to other people, to get your ideas out there, to have somebody see that, okay, that's somebody that I want to talk to, and maybe reach out and talk to them. The same thing on, what used to be Twitter, now X, Blue Sky, all the tax people out there. Somebody got a problem, talk to them. See if you can help them. If you've seen that particular problem before, help them with that problem. A lot of these people are just starting out or in the first 10 years or whatever. Or they don't have any idea
Yeah.
how to go solve these things sometimes.
So at what point did you go from just locally, right, just being in the mall, calling people, to being a little bit more, statewide and then national? Was it until the internet came along, or what else did you do, back in the day to kind of get more clients?
It was after the internet came along, because pretty much up to that point, it was like Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill. And then, somebody would move and they would be in another state. And so they'd mail you stuff back. But we really didn't have a way other than the telephone, to communicate.
Yeah.
Then there was no video for sure. I mean, we thought, when Cape Bod came out, oh my God, we thought wow, we landed.
Yeah.
We can do something now. Because back then it was all bulletin boards and stuff. It was, the original ArcNet and such.
Yeah.
It was green screens, yellow screens. I mean, it was primitive compared to what we have now and all this graphical user interface stuff.
And then you had to have another line, right? Because you were using your telephone line. So now you had to get a second line so that you can have the phone free.
Yeah. I mean, just it's the evolution that I've seen in this business, going from, even just the Apple IIe's to an IBM with a 10 megabyte hard drive, that was like this big and that thick. And it was like a rock. It was literally that. It was really heavy. The original, 10 megabyte hard drives, I saw some, and they were like this big and that thick. Back when they were attached to like an IBM style mainframe
Supercomputer. Well, we thought it was a supercomputer, right? But now it's like, yeah.
Yeah, and now, you're carrying these phones around in your hand that basically is its own computer. It's a good time to be alive. Of course,
Yeah, I agree.
don't look at the market for the last 2 days, because that's a whole nother thing right there. That's what you call a man-made disaster.
Yeah, but hey, it goes in cycles, right? So eventually it'll go up again. That's a good thing.
This one's going to be a bit more problematic, I think, because the other ones were cycled. This was actually somebody doing something that made no sense. We're going to go in this direction. And normally people stop you from doing really bad stuff that, makes no sense.
Yeah.
It didn't happen this time. We've just gone in that direction. So, hey, we'll see what happens.
Exactly. We'll see what happens. And so, I mean, do you still, I'm wondering, do you still have, that mindset, that mentality of knocking on doors, going out and trying to get clients? Or how has that changed from before to now? How are you getting clients now? Are you still going after them, or just, how do they find you?
We go after them more selectively now. Before it was like we take anybody in that was coming in the door. Now we're much more selective. Is there something in there that I really am going to find entertaining or challenging, or, it just sounds like a really cool idea, because I don't want to do boring stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I'm at Medicare age. So, basically I want to have fun for what I do from this point forward. So there got to be some element of fun to it.
Is there any kind of industry or company that it's fun for you usually would say, hey, I love working with, I don't know, airlines. Just that was the first thing that came to my mind.
I would never. No, I remember something that I heard somebody say years ago that they learned when they were. I want to say they were at Goldman, and they said, "Don't ever touch an airline,
Yeah.
ever," because I remember back in the good old days of airlines, just right after deregulation, where you still had Eastern, you still had Pan Am, you still had TWA, and you had upstarts like New York Air. Now you could
Okay.
fly from Raleigh, Durham to New York on New York Air, and it was a party in the sky. Those days are long gone. Now you are a sardine in the sky. Okay.
Yeah.
We are past the fun point of flying. It was fun back then. There was drinks, there was snacks, there was all kinds. There was kibitzing with the people. I mean, there's no kibitzing anymore. It's like get your ass on the plane and get your ass off the plane.
Yeah.
It's no fun anymore. So no airlines. These days, people come in and they tell me like, I had some guys come in that were, some business school people, graduates from Duke, and they said we want to do this kind of a business here, and it's healthcare related. And I asked them, and looking over their spreadsheets, I said, where's the mileage reimbursement? They said, what mileage reimbursement? I said, you're asking these employees to go out and do stuff, okay, which means they have to travel from place to place to place, probably 100 some odd miles per day. And, somehow you're expecting them to get paid for that, right? Because you're driving their cars. I said, you got to give them a mileage reimbursement of some kind. I said, ideally, what the federal rate is. I said, you don't have that in there. I said, that's a lot of money for all these employees. They kind of left dejected because,
The numbers don't work anymore, right?
right, the numbers don't work anymore. I probably take 1 out of 10 things that come through the door, but there are some fun things that are like, they'll come in and say, well, I owe the IRS money for this, and then they tell you why they owe the IRS money, and you're like, well, that's an interesting story. And you're like, okay, I'll take that because now I got something to work with. I got something I can be creative about. I remember years ago I was taking, and I guess this is like 97, 98, 99, 3 summers in a row where I took a class under Bob, Get the First Fee First McKenzie. He was a Chicago attorney that did a lot of controversy work. And he said, we're going to set up a class here and you're going to act like you're the person representing your client before the IRS. And so we're doing this. And at the time, gas prices had gone up dramatically. So I throw that into the example that I'm working with. Bob says, wait a minute, stop right there. Where did that come from? That is not in any of the material. I said, no, but it's in reality. I pulled what's in reality. Just like now this stuff is going on with the stock market, I'm taking that reality, putting it into my letter to the IRS on behalf of clients that I'm asking for an appeal on a levy motion that they've already insisted on, saying, look, they've already received a 20% pay cut based on their funding comes from grants from the federal government. So there's 20% gone there. The other spouse's hours have been reduced by 20% because he also works in something that has some grant funds to it. So he's been reduced. I said, so there's already a hardship there. Now, in addition, there's this other thing that's happening that we don't know what the hardship is going to create at this moment in time, 6 months down the road. We have a huge change in circumstances, a large amount of chaos, and we don't know the answer.
Yeah.
That's in my example. Because again, it's real world stuff. It's happening now. When we send the letter out next week, I don't think it'll be resolved. So we're going to use it.
I think that's a very good way of going about it, right? Because you're actually looking at the big picture. You're not looking at just like, oh, there's 1 or 2 things independently. It's how it all works together. Right. And I'm guessing that helps you get more positive responses than negative ones, right? When you're appealing to those kind of things.
Yeah, it is much easier for any governmental agency to tell you no because they've got documentation that allows them to back that up. No problem. Getting somebody to a yes is very difficult.
Okay.
But invariably, you could almost get everybody to a yes. It's just a matter of how long it takes. And that's where that door knocking stuff comes in handy. Because if anything,
persistence.
I am persistent.
What's been the funniest or like the weirdest reason that you've given and that they've said yes to? Saying, okay, yeah, well, that's...
Oh, I remember years ago, it was like around Christmas time when they had levied this poor guy's account. And literally, I'm on the phone going, but it's Christmas. You want to be Scrooge? And they released the money purely based on that.
Oh, that's awesome. That was a good example.
You got to feel out this other person. I mean, I'm used to talking on the phone, so you feel out the other person and you kind of figure out what's important to them. You look for clues, okay? And you're observing, but you're doing it in over a distance, and obviously with a telephone it's much more difficult than it is in person, because in person you can look on somebody's desk, you can see what pictures they have, they've got a dog, it's a schnauzer, whatever, you can relate to that, you can bring that up in conversation. Much more difficult on the phone, but even on the telephone. I remember I was going this one time, I was trying to get through a bunch of people at IRS to get to Utah, to find somebody in the deep dark hole that is the Utah Service Center, and get somebody to give me a copy. This is back in the days where you really couldn't pull this stuff off the internet. Give me a copy of the account history and the wage and income transcripts for that year. And I want to say it was like 2002. So it was in the dark ages as far as anybody today is concerned. But, I start out with this lady in Maryland, and she says to me, "Your name's Gundersdorff." I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I have 2 F's. I said, she's like, "Well, I grew up in Baltimore, and there's lots of Gundersdorffs with 1 F. I said, "Yep, they're distant relatives of some kind and or description, but I don't know where they fit in the family tree, to be quite honest." And she goes on to tell me about her teacher and da-da-da sort of thing. Well, that enabled me to get to the next step in the chain. I continued that conversation. So you use whatever is available to you in that conversation to get to the next person. And like somebody told me, there's only 2 people that work for IRS. There's Attila the Hun and there's Mother Teresa. That's it. 2 employees. Nobody else. So if you get Attila the Hun, we have some static.
Yeah, I'll try someone else.
Call back when the line is more clear, and hopefully you get Mother Teresa. If not, try again.
That's another skill, I bet, that you learn from knocking on doors and calling people just to try and get them as clients. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need to keep banging your head against the wall, because it goes back to that whole Marine Corps philosophy of, if you can't go through it, get around it, go under it, go over it, whatever, but get on the other side of it.
By any means necessary.
By any means necessary, yeah.
That's good. Thank you for that example. I mean, just changing subjects a little bit. We talked before, you said, so you have a team, right, of people that work with you, because you already have a team, right? And at the stage that you are in your career, what's like a typical day look like for you? What do you work on, day after day?
No 2 days are the same. Like yesterday, I was working on 2024 returns, for individuals. Today, I'm going to be working on a 2023 corporate return. That's cool. Okay. And then after I generate the K1s, I'll go do the individual returns for 2023 for those folks, because we're in that disaster zone. So, we're under extension until May 1. So there is no typical day. There's some times where I'm just working on a problem, something that's been bothering me, and trying to figure it out. So I'll just play with it. And I say play with it, but really it's like just trying different things out, looking up different things. Maybe it's a problem in Excel, I couldn't get something to work, or so I'll try it in ChatGPT, I'll try it in Copilot, I'll try it in something else, get me formulas to do this. And if it doesn't work, then, I just put it aside and go on to the next thing and work on that. And sometimes it's just research, and sometimes it's just reading, reading what's coming out in terms of newsletters from other tax professionals, or reading what's coming from newsletters from organizations that I'm a member of, the NAEA, the National Association of Enrolled Agents, the National Association of Tax Practitioners, the National Society of Accountants. All of these organizations, they all put out newsletters. Yeah. More or less, they're all the same, but sometimes they write it differently than somebody, one of the other organizations. And so you see something different in there, and I can use that with such and such. Like I took a class earlier this year where they suddenly changed the fellow that was teaching the class had an audit on qualified charitable distributions. Well, it turns out that the IRS wanted a letter from the charity saying that they got the money from that IRA. They wanted a letter from the IRA people, the fiduciary, saying they sent the money to the charity.
Okay.
That's redundant, okay, in so many ways. But here's the deal. You're in the audit. This is your taxpayer. So how much time do you want to spend arguing about what they're asking you for when basically it's readily available? Yeah. You'll get it. So in our practice, this is in mid-February I took this class, I said, we're going to go get those things from now on. We're going to have them in the file so that we don't have to do this. We've got it. Because what I've learned over 40-some years is that basically if you take all the stuff that somebody could ask you about, and you have it in the file one way or the other. Now, that file might be, we use PDFs, basically. We scan everything in, searchable PDFs. So we have most of the stuff there. If we have file copies, they go in the file. But, I always have a printout of the return, because I'm still one of those paper people. I mean, you can see by all these books behind me.
Yeah.
I still like to look at paper every once in a while to go find something. I still like indexes. I know, foreign concept to a lot of people, but indexes are a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Glossaries, another cool thing. You know, back when West Text Dictionary was actually, you had an index and a glossary. You could
Yeah.
go find things very quickly, very easily. Now you type it into Google, you get all this other crap that comes up with it. But basically, somewhere in there is a definition. You can get to a definition faster by
Yeah.
so that kind of stuff. But these are just things you learn over time. And part of the problem was, you know, back when I first started representing clients, I didn't know I couldn't represent the clients. I didn't have a license. I didn't have a license until 1997. So
Okay.
I'm representing people. And the first question I always got when I went to the service, because I would always have the interview papers already printed out, the 45, whatever the series was, I'd have them printed out with all the answers. They said, "Did you used to work for the service?" No. I've taken a lot of continuing ed.
Yeah.
And sometimes you played Columbo when you went into the service. I would wear a trench coat and I'd actually be carrying this dolly of paperwork on it, you know, like, and you want to look at all this? Yeah, I'll put all these boxes on your desk. And they go, no. I just need to see a spreadsheet, or I need to see whatever, you know, information. And basically, you know, them not wanting to go through those boxes, yeah, you could have found some stuff in those boxes, but you got a choice here. This is one of those tactical decisions that you have to make as both the auditor and as the representative. How do we want to play this? I could have gone either way. We can go item for item, or we can kind of take it the easy route. Your choice. You got to play the auditor. I've had auditors that wanted to go item by item. We've done that. It didn't work out well, but because again, you got to be prepared.
Yeah.
This guy from Philly that was I think he was in the steel industry originally, and he was a pissed off individual because he really wanted to stay where he was, and he wound up working for the IRS, and he did not like it. And he's auditing this grocery store. And so I called up the grocery store supplier and said, "Can you give me everything that you guys put on the shelves and what the cost was and what you told them to put it on the shelf for? Because apparently that's the service they paid for." These guys did that. So it's like a 400-page report. So I get the report and I said to him, "I'm going to send this to UPS." He says, "No, I want you to fax it today." Not a problem. We start faxing. About 50 pages in, I start getting phone calls off the hook. Now, mind you, I still got memory. A couple more 50 pages are going through on my side.
Yeah.
We're like 200 pages in by the time he calls. This manager is having a conniption because they're still using the roll paper. They do not have that much paper in their office. And of course, 400 pages on the roll paper is just, you know, it's not pretty. So he says, "Stop sending that and send it to me by UPS."
Okay.
You can do it however you like it. We can do it the easy way. We can do it the hard way. You know, I grew up in Jersey, so, you know, I grew up with these people.
Yeah, like, hey, I wanted to comply, right? You said this, I'm complying, so I told you it was going to be easier.
There's the spirit of something, and then there's the exact text of something. And then there's everything in between. And depending on how we want to be, you tell me how you want to run this. We can go with whatever. I don't care. I'm old.
Okay. So it sounds like there is definitely, like you said, right, no 2 days are the same, so it's nothing boring. So, I mean, we talked about this, right? You don't really, like, you don't see yourself stopping, right? You want to keep going, you want to continue doing this, but what are your goals, you know, for like the next 6 to 12 months, you know, in the business?
Next 6 to 12 months, I want to get our sales up to about $600,000 a year. I want to get my staff a bit more oiled in terms of you know, how they operate, because right now they're good employees, but I've never been the type of person to really, management is not where I want to be. You need to have somebody that does that. Fortunately, my wife got laid off by a Fortune 500 company, and she was in management, so she's been my vice president on the corporate books for I don't know how long now. So she says to me one day, "I'd like you to hire me." I looked at her like, "You sure about that?" So she's come in, and really that's been a godsend because she knows way more about that. You got to have policies. You got to do this. You got to do some training. That is not me. I know how to go do stuff. I don't want to do all that training. I just want to go do my thing. That's the non-fun stuff to me.
It's great that you guys complement each other.
Yeah.
In those ways as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how long ago did you hire her?
About December.
Oh, okay. So it just happened then.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can tell you that she already knows where I'm making mistakes.
I bet she knew that since before you hired her.
Possibly. But now she knows it intrinsically, extrinsically. She feels it. She feels it directly.
Okay. That's great. That's awesome. I think it's great, you know, that, I mean, having your spouse, I mean, honestly, I don't think that anybody will take care of your business as much as you or your spouse, right? Because it's both of yours, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's great when stuff
I
like
even
that
have my
happens.
dog sitting here. Let me take the camera here and show you the dog sitting over there. Yeah.
Nice.
She, she, she does. That's her best thing. She sleeps. She is really, other than when I get up, then she wants a treat because she's like,
Yeah.
"We got up, time to go for a treat."
That's awesome. And Jim, I just have a couple more questions,
Yeah,
before
go
we
ahead.
wap up the podcast.
Yeah,
I know that we can keep talking for hours, right?
yeah.
And I've had a lot of fun talking to you,
Well, you can always have me
today,
back. That's fine.
last, and a few days ago. But this is a funny question that I like asking everyone, so bear with me. But if you had, a magic wand that you just wave, like solve one thing, in business, what would that one thing be?
Actually, get enough people to work at the IRS so that when you call on the phone, you can get somebody to answer your call. And also, when you send it a letter, you don't get a response back that says, "Thank you for your letter," or really, "Thank you for your inquiry. We'll need 60 days to get back to you." And then in 60 days, they send another letter. We need another 60 days. I mean, during the pandemic, we were going on almost 2 years at some points to get a response back. I mean, I finally finished, and some of it was just absolutely stupid. Like
Yeah.
they sent a check in, IRS applied it to the wrong year, and now I needed to get it applied to the proper year because it's generating all these notices. And the year they put it to, we haven't filed yet. So, like, can you all work with me here, please? So,
Wow.
yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be getting the IRS enough people get their software updated, get their computers updated, because literally there's these architecture actually put in place in the 60s, and it's now cobbled together between COBOL, Fortran, and then they just keep putting systems on top of that. So depending on what year you were in when you developed whatever the next item was in the mod, you've got DOS, you've got Windows that acts like DOS, or DOS that's masquerading as Windows, whatever you want to call it. But, that was like the Windows 2000 stuff.
Yeah.
And then, you start working into the iterations of Windows after that. But I mean, all of these systems are built on top of other systems, and it's a disaster. And you really can't like take it apart, shut it down, and start over and reboot. You're going to have to figure out how to migrate that stuff forward. So that's what I would, if I wave magic wand, fix all that, because literally that's our biggest difficulty in life is getting things fixed for clients.
With everything that's going on, I'm sadly, I don't think that's going to be something that will happen anytime soon. But we'll see.
If you got a bunch of accountants in the room and said, "Go fix the IRS," we could fix it. Right? Because the people I talk to, we call it tax Twitter or what's the other one? Blue Sky Tax. Those people, we're all over the spectrum in terms of political affiliation. But get us in a room and we do know how to solve problems. That is what we are good at. And literally that, I think, is the biggest problem with Congress, is we have a bunch of attorneys sitting in the room, and nothing to bash attorneys, but, the whole system is based on contention. Whereas accountants are trying to figure out, how do we get this damn thing off our desk? And how do we go do something else in the shortest amount of time, because we don't want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
We could solve these problems. We could fix the budget. We could fix the deficit. We could fix the debt. All of those things we could fix, but you need accountants to do that. Bunch of attorneys are not going to do that. That is not in their wheelhouse.
Well, hopefully someone that can do something about that, listens to this and listens to your advice, and maybe they can give you guys a call. The other question, the second to last question that I want to ask you is, what does success mean to you? What does it look like?
Success is that feeling that you get after you got something done that looked impossible. And
I love that.
Fact that you got it done, that you might never get that done again given those same set of circumstances, because it just worked that time. But that feeling that you get is great. And then like 30 minutes later, it's like, well, damn, now what am I going to go do?
I love that. That's deep.
But it's that moment in time. And if you can get back to that moment in time, it's like this therapist I had years ago. And he said that the problem with life is that we suffer. And we suffer because we are attempting to make things conform to whatever we have in our mind that they should conform to. Like I said to him one time, I said, "I thought this was supposed to get easier as you got older." He looks at me and says, "Who the hell told you that?" Now, mind you, he was in his 70s. I was in my 40s at the time. And, really brought that point home, that like, that was a misconception on my part, that things were going to get easier as I got older and somehow make more sense.
Yeah.
They don't. They won't. So you got to find that piece of heaven, that little moment of clarity where things just like work. And you got to figure out how to get back there in your own head and remember that feeling, as opposed to constantly having to redo that feeling, because that's what makes us miserable. You got to find that and be happy with that little moment where they exist. It might be something as simple as you're sitting on your deck on a Friday evening, the band's playing at the high school behind you, and you're grilling a steak and having a sip of scotch. It might be that moment, but you got to find those moments wherever they are of joy and enjoy them, because that's all this is about.
I love that. That's great. I'm going to go back and look at the recording, and I think I'm going to write that down because I actually like that a lot. It's very deep, and I think it's something that could help a lot of people, if we internalize it. And just the last question for you, Jim, would be, what advice would you give, to younger people that might be in a situation similar to where you were, right, before quitting and starting your business? Like, what advice would you give those kinds of people when they're thinking about starting their own CPA firm, EA firm, whatever it is? What advice would that be?
Go and talk to the folks that have been doing it for a while and figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and figure out what you need to be successful, and bring on mentors. That would have been hugely helpful to me at the time.
I agree. I'm big on mentors. I love that. And I think that, I'm 37, right? So I can't really say the younger generations, because there just might be one or two below me. But I think definitely, the younger people, and I see that a lot in my younger cousins, we don't value, that mentorship that much. I was thankfully, I was lucky enough to have some early mentors when I was younger, and that just, helped me get that initial push, but also helped me understand the importance of them. So to this day, I still have them. And if somebody, reaches out to me, I like mentoring them as well. But that's one thing that I see new generations missing, that mentorship part. I think they can find everything on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and that's just not the case.
You learn that stuff talking to people. That's where you actually have a relationship with someone that's older than you, and you actually also have a relationship with someone that's younger than you, and you start doing the same thing, because you're going to figure out, well, hell, I knew more than what that person knows right now, but this person knows more than me and what I know right now. So it's a transfer of information in the same sense that we do a transfer of wealth in this country between generations. The information, the stuff that's institutional knowledge, whether it's actually in the institution or it's out there in just the societal institutional knowledge, it's massive in terms of what gets left on the table from one generation to the next, because we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel. And it's like, we already did that. Let's use the wheel we have and figure out how to make it better.
Yeah. I agree. Thank you so much, Jim,
Thank you
for being here. Thank you for the openness and answering all the questions. I really appreciate your time. And where can people find out more about you? What's your website? Your email, etc.
They can go to gunny.com, and that's Gunny GUNNY.com. That's a starting point. You can go find me on Twitter. You type in Gunny, you'll probably get there. The same thing for Blue Sky, although Blue Sky I totally haven't figured out yet. But anyway, other than that, our email address is tax, TAX.DOCS @gunny.com. And that'd be the best way.
I'll make sure to put the links, down below on YouTube, up at top of LinkedIn.
I'm everywhere, so yeah.
Good. Thank you so much, Jim, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right.